Melo, let's start from the beginning, and maybe you can tell us about your parents and their decision to leave Italy and come to the United States.
My father was born in Fiume Denisi, Sicily. My mother was born in Washington, D.C. The daughter of immigrants. My grandfather had emigrated to the U.S. in the late 1800s. He went back and forth from Italy a dozen times, and finally in 1920 he had decided to return to Italy for good, and he took the family back along with my mother, who was then 9 years old. She continued her life in Fiume Denisi, where my father was a young man, and eventually they grew old enough to get married. And so I was born of an Italian father and, in quotation mark, an American mother, even though she was Italian in all sense of the word. In 1950, after the war, because the conditions of life in Italy weren't so great, Italy had been devastated by the war, suddenly my mother one day got a letter from the Consul General in Palermo advising her that since she was an American citizen, she was entitled to return to her homeland, namely Washington, D.C. My father liked the idea that she could come and explore the situation, and which she did, and she came in 1950. In those days, there were no telephones. Wrote back that Washington was indeed a good city to bring up the family, and my father decided on the spot to emigrate to the United States. And so in 1951, my father and I came to America, specifically Washington, D.C. Here in Washington, my father, a tailor by trade, started working in several places, namely Garfinkel's and Woodmore and Lothrop and Deli and Mark, some of the better men's shops in the city. And my mother, who had been helping my father in Italy in his shops, my father was what they called a head tailor. I had a contract with the Italian Defense Ministry to make clothing for the troops. And she had been helping my father in the shop, and she was a tailoress. And she also worked as a tailor in Washington, D.C. So they both worked as tailors in Washington.
Can you speak about their reasons for coming from Italy to the U.S.?
Well, the decision for my father, in retrospect, I have to say, was very easy. The prospect of building up a family in Italy was not as great as being to do it in the United States. So the movies that we were seeing in Italy were showing opulence and a great life in the States. So my father had no difficulty in saying, why stay here and struggle when in the United States we can be on top of the world. So my father decided very quick to explore the life in the United States. So we packed up and left, and we came.
So Melo, your memory of the Italy that you're talking about, what was that? The Italy of the war and the Italy of...
Well, I was 17 years old by the time I left Italy, but I was old enough in 1934. I was born in 1934. In 1944 was the end of the war, so I remember distinctly going to the shelters at night, running, not taking clothes off when we went to bed, and waiting for the sirens to tell us it was time to run to the shelter. And but all this ended by 1945-46. Next, from 1945 to 1951, those 6 years, we moved from, the family moved from Sicily to Rome, and Rome was the capital of the Western world culturally. whereas Washington was meant or was said to be the capital of the Occidental world, the Western world, of the free world, because in those days still there was the curtain call, there was a division between the East and the West. So we moved from one capital to the other.
But you came into New York, right?
Came to New York, Ellis Island, like everybody.
What was the feeling when you saw the Statue of Liberty?
Well, the feeling was of reality. Until then, all I knew about the Statue of Liberty was what you see in the books, or in some documentaries, or in some films. We did not know exactly today what the meaning of the Statue of Liberty was, or where it came from, and how it came to be placed, where it was placed. But it was a symbol of the United States, a place where lots of people before us had come to make the new home. So it was. I remember also, look, there's the statue. We're in America. We're finally in America, and of course we had some relatives that came up at Pier 89 in New York to meet the boat, and here we are. We step up into New York City, where you look up and see these buildings 70, 80 stories high. You couldn't see the sky. That was a difference, a very, very traumatic experience, because we used to Messina, especially, where after the war of 1908, there were no buildings constructed over 2 stories high. So you walk in the streets and it's blue skies all over the place. In New York, you couldn't see the sky. All you saw was windows right and left and stores.
Now, did you stay in New York for a while?
No, we came. We stayed in New York for 2-3 days. Guest of my mother's godparents, as a matter of fact. But we came right to Washington. I arrived in Washington on January the 4th, 1952, and we left Naples December 27th, 1951.
And what was your view of Washington when you first came? You were coming from Rome and New York, really capitals, to
Washington. The first impression was a little town. It was a sleepy little town. It was. This is the capital of the Western world compared to Rome. This was like a little village, Washington. Washington in 1952 is not the Washington you see today. Along K Street, there was a building that was over two stories high. Where the Capitol, in the back of the Capitol, there were small buildings where I learned the meaning of what hot house meant. There was houses that literally had no plumbing indoors, that still they had this outdoor plumbing. I saw the change, the osmosis of Washington. I lived it. And now Washington is truly a cosmopolitan town. In 1954, 55, 56, opera, you could see an opera, live opera in Washington, D.C. every 2-3 years, and the Metropolitan Opera would come and do one performance at the then Capitol Theater. And then the Carter Barron Amphitheater, where they have the tennis courts now, the Samaggi Opera Company would do the summer festival. Then for 2 weeks they have second-class opera, but it was opera nevertheless. It all changed in 1980 when they built the Kennedy Center, and Washington became of age as far as the arts are concerned. There was an opera house, the playhouse, and the National Symphony Orchestra, which until then played in the in Constitution Hall, the seat of the Daughters of the American Revolution, finally had a place that was built to be an orchestra place and not an auditorium adapted to play opera, orchestra. And of course, the National Theatre, with which I got involved because in 1954 was my first job that I got. I was as a special assistant to the manager, and I had my first taste of managing theaters in America, in Washington, D.C.
And was that your first, had you done that at all?
Well, I had not done that professionally. In fact, it was the year that I had enrolled at Catholic University in the speech and drama department, and the only related work that I could get was the National Theatre. I was lucky that I applied for the job and I was hired instantly. So I got permission from Father Hockey to work in a related field, and I started working at the National Theatre, 1954.
Wow, okay. And that was your intention, to be in the theater and arts from the very beginning, right?
From the very beginning. In Rome, I was preparing to enter the art school, the Roman art school, which was preparatory to work in the movies or in the theater. And I was kind of stopped in the middle. But thank God, Catholic University in Washington had a department, speech and drama department, which was the equivalent of the School for the Arts in Rome. And I took the college entrance exam, passed it, and I was interviewed by the then head of the department, Father Harkey, and he opened the doors to me, and he welcomed me to the drama department. I stayed. That's how I began studying for the theater.
And then, did you get drafted, or because you ended up in the army and over in Europe?
It's a long story, because what happened was being interested in the arts, of course, and being Italian. The only thing Italian in America was the Italian Actors Union in New York, of which I became soon a member. As soon as I could join the union, I joined the Italian Actors Union in New York. In 1954, New York hosted the first festival of the Italian song that was going to start in New York but tour the U.S., the major cities in the U.S. And of course, from Washington, I went to New York. I don't know why. After the show, I had the instinct to go backstage and ask for the producer. And the producer told me what they were doing. And I asked him, but don't you think you could have somebody with you that speaks both languages? Says, yeah, that's exactly what we need. You hired. He said, if you're looking for a job, you hired. So I came back to Washington. I got stopped. I told Father Aki, I have to leave you because I got this, the school, I have to join the Italian festival. Unfortunately, I had a deferment from the draft. And before I knew, I got a letter because university, of course, had to notify the draft board that I was no longer attending full-time courses at the university. And while I was touring with the Italian festival, at Christmas time I came home, 1955, and there my mother says, hey Melo, there's this postcard here, I don't know what it means. I read it was from the draft board, so innocently I went to the draft board and I said, what is this? He says, well, this is your draft board, you're over 18 now, and you are obligated to serve in the army. I said, but I am doing this now too late. You're here now, you're in the army now. The famous. So I never went back to the Italian festival because I was shipped. 1 week later. I was on my way to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as an American soldier.
But did they recognize also your theatrical talents somehow?
That came after the first 8 weeks of basic training and the second 8 weeks of advanced basic training, when they assigned you MOS military specialty number. And of course, I was assigned an infantry MOS. And that's when I protested, but my background is in the theater, so they reassigned me to special services. And I was assigned to Third Army Special Services in Atlanta, Georgia. And while I was in Atlanta, Georgia, I did the summer festival, military festival, a show called You Army Around the World. And at the end of that run, I came to Washington, not knowing what my next step would be. And I asked for an interview in the proper echelons. I went to the Director of Special Services at Fort Meade, and she recommended me to be reassigned, and I was reassigned to Germany, and served the rest of my Army days in Stuttgart as a director of the 7th Army Symphony Orchestra and soldier shows, which produced shows to play around Europe, the European theater, for the American soldiers stationed in those places. I did one thing though before going to Germany, for some presentiment. Since I had been in the States over 5 years and therefore matured the time to become an American citizen, I asked to become citizen, which they accommodated me. So George Sirica of Watergate fame had me in his chambers, and I became an American citizen before being shipped to Germany, which was my lucky day, because the first thing that happened to me in Milan, because of being in Europe, being an Italian, the first chance that I had, I wanted to visit my friends and relatives in Italy, and I went to Milano. There in Milano, I arrived at 7:45 in the evening. At 8:30, somebody knocked on the door, and he was an Italian policeman with a warrant for my arrest, because for the Italian army, I was a draft dodger. So when I produced my documents to the army, the Maresciallo della Polizia, the marshal, I said, I cannot be both an Italian and American. I'm an American citizen. The uniform you see in the closet is an American uniform. Therefore, I will not follow you to your post, and the only place I can follow you is to the main station where there was an MP station, where you call the MPs, and they can arrest me. I was very, very firm with this. You cannot touch me. Only an American police officer can touch me. So I got on the phone, and I heard from what I heard, I understood that he was told by his superiors to leave me alone, and that there was a misunderstanding, and that was it. But had not had that presentiment to become an American citizen, they would have taken me. There was no two ways about it, because I had violated the Italian law as an Italian citizen.
Well, after your stint in the army, you decided to stay in Europe. Did you?
Yes. After I stayed in Europe, there was a provision that if you return to college, you could get discharged up to 90 days ahead of time. And because the new commanding general of 7th Army did not like soldiers to be musicians or theater people, he abolished the unit. The 7th Army Symphony Orchestra and Soldier Shows, which was a provisional company, disappeared from the annals of the U.S. military forces. And at that point, the choice would have been to end up carrying a rifle at the border with the East Germany, which I didn't like. So I applied for university. The University of Perugia was one of the universities that allowed Americans to register. So I registered at the University of Perugia, and I finished my 24 months of services at the University of Perugia.
We're here at Casa Italiana, next to the Holy Rosary Church.
Yes.
When and how did you get involved here?
1951.
So before...
1952, really, because the first thing I did when we arrived in Washington was look for an Italian church. And I came to Holy Rosary. Father De Carlo was the pastor. And he says, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Melo Cicala." Oh, he says, "Oh no, another Cicala in Washington," because the Cicalas were not known to be churchgoers. So I said, "No, I was brought up with the Jesuits, with the Salesians. My last school was St. Mary College in Rome, which was run by the Marianists. So I'm a good Catholic boy. I belong to the Azione Cattolica and all that." So I started coming here since 1952.
So Melo, what about the neighborhood, this neighborhood, Holy Rosary? How has that changed since 1952?
It was like a church you find in any small towns in Italy. Father De Carlo was a country parishioner, country priest. This church was an employment agency, a hospital, a lawyer's office, was everything. Italians came to Holy Rosary for anything that you could think of. And Father De Carlo, in his small way, took care of all these needs for the Italian community. And then I found out that on Mondays, there was a restaurant nearby here that was closed for their normal customers, and Father De Carlo used to visit there every Monday night. And before I knew, I found myself there because Donna Annunziata, the owner, said, "Hey Melo, why don't you come here on Monday, because Father De Carlo comes here." So I became acquainted with Father De Carlo, besides being the priest of Holy Rosary, on the human side, became friends with him.
I just want to say for a quick sec, Father De Carlo is maybe the most important member in the history of this whole community. He embodied the early spirit for the Italian immigrants. And so if you can, Mel, talk a little bit more about his vision, his foresight.
But Father De Carlo wanted to make Holy Rosary the showpiece for Italian churches in America. And he started starting from the basement of a home parishioner, and then little by little, it became what it was here in 1960. He was literally the leader of the Italian community in Washington. They knew Father De Carlo at the police station. They knew me everywhere, because everybody, any time an Italian ran into any kinds of problem, they come to Father De Carlo. The restaurateurs that needed help in the restaurant would come to Father De Carlo. Do you know anybody that needs to work and that knows how to cook? And Father De Carlo would, if he did not know anybody, he would get busy and find somebody. Go around until helping the seeker of work and the seeker of worker. And he was really an institution in Washington.
He was here for 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah.
Father De Carlo, his vision was very ample. And after he built the church, he wanted, his idea was to build a center for the elderly, for the Italians. So he started raising the funds to buy the land. Then after he found the land, he bought the land. The land was there. I started raising funds to put the building. And if he got the money and he started the building. After he put the building, he went to Italy to find an order of monastic order that would have where there would be some nuns willing to move to the United States to be the nurses in this nursing home for the Italians. And that's how Villa Rosa was born, as a center, not just a home for the aged, but an Italian center where Italians could retire and still enjoy their Italianity here and still be within the area where their relatives were. And that lasted for a while.
What a vision. But also describe some of the programs that here the church had, artistic and cultural. Which I know you were a big part of.
Yeah,
all things artistic and cultural in Washington, D.C. Melo had a hand in.
Well, we had every Friday night, there was a dance being held at the Holy Rosary. There are some parishioners today that met in those circumstances. I was still single till 1961, so I met several of my dates here in this church. I was married in this church, and my mother and father were buried from this church, and my brother was buried from this church. This was our church, and the Holy Rosary had a marching band, Romeo's band, and there was, besides Italian musicians, the second generation Italians that were playing in their high school bands would join the band. We had the processions at Holy Rosary were preceded by a marching band. But then all this, as the Italians started to migrate from this center to suburbia, Silver Spring, Virginia, right and left, then the community became smaller and smaller, and I'd say that Father De Carlo was the glue, and when the glue was no longer here, there was not, the second generation Italians had found their roots in their parishes, in their area. I personally, to explain this, from my home to Holy Rosary, I passed by 7 Catholic churches. That tells you an idea. It takes an extra effort to be willing to come to the Italian church, and I live within 3 miles. Now we're talking about 20 miles. It's the temptation to go to Mass at the Annunciation Church or the St. Teresa of Lib. It's too big, especially in the winter time when the streets are not so nice to handle and things like that.
Staying on Father De Carlo,
yes.
Did he also have political influence? I mean, we're right near the Capitol and the federal government.
But I don't know if he had political influence, because he was not a political person. Father De Carlo was an Augustinian priest, very, very, I would call him a country priest. It was not, he didn't like publicity. He was drawn back, and he did what he had to do. He visited, he knew everybody that was sick, and he made sure that he visited with them. But political, I don't think so. It was political, no. And no, the answer is no.
Okay, but he also started the church when Washington was a backwater town, and then the city started getting more sophisticated, and he had to operate in a more sophisticated city.
He started the church when Washington was not a parish. Washington was part of the Baltimore archdiocese, and he was a student. He was a student at the Catholic University, and the Archbishop of Baltimore, knowing that, he asked him if he could start a little chapel, at least so that the Italians wouldn't have to go to Baltimore for confession. They could go to confession here but there were no Italian-speaking priests, and they didn't speak English. So that's how it all started. And things did change. At that point that you're aware, we sit in the midst of the city, surrounded by neo-Greek style buildings and all marble, and the Italians were all working. You can literally say that this section of town was built by the Italians, and the church was in the midst of this. And it was so much in the midst of it, of the 5 or 6 Italian grocery stores, 2 were located right within 5 blocks of the church. The Niosi store was down the street, and Vaccaro's Bakery and Delicatessen was up on 4th Street. And if there ever was a Little Italy in Washington, an area that you could define a Little Italy, that would be this area. 4th Street to Union Station, Mass Avenue to Independence Avenue. This is Little Italy. For instance, I know that my mother was baptized in St. Joseph's Church, which is on Capitol Hill. She was not, my grandfather did not live in Italy because he was not a bricklayer or stone carver or tile setter. He had a shoe shop, and shoe shops were located where there were Americans that needed shoes repaired, and not in an area where Italian workers were needed.
Melo, you mentioned the restaurant Torino that you used to meet Father DiCarlo on Mondays, but you turned up having a larger role in the Torino restaurant.
Well, when I came back from the service in Italy, after having been throughout Europe, because the troops were stationed all over, and I had noticed that in Europe, every medium-sized city, village, towns, they all had an Italian restaurant where the Italians met. More Italians emigrated in Europe than they did in the United States after the war. Washington did not have anything like this. The Torino was the only authentic Italian restaurant as far as food was concerned. But it was established in 1923. By 1960, it had gotten old. But Donna Annunziata had a piano in there, and I go on Mondays before Father DiCarlo would come in. I go in there and play the piano for her, and she starts singing. And, in 1959, they decided to retire, and Torino was going to be raised to make room for a parking lot until I talked to the investors, and they agreed that they should keep the building up if they were sure that the building could generate the same amount of money that the parking lot operator would pay them. I said I could try, and they listed me the place, and so the Torino became Melo's Torino in 1960. And the first thing I did was hire a piano player to play piano every night. I found an Italian way to play the mandolin, so I played the mandolin with the guitar. Then I spread the word at Catholic University with my former professors and students that there was a place now that was friendly to the performing arts. I passed the word around. Washington in the 60s was a very, very active city in nightclubs. So all the performers visiting the nightclubs had to go someplace after work at night. So I started keeping the restaurant open until 4 o'clock in the morning to make room for the entertainers to come and eat. And before you know, the voice spread around that if they're in town you'll find them at Melo's. And we enjoyed the stars of show business, the biggest names in show business. They all came there to eat and fraternize and so on. It was a club more than a restaurant. And this lasted until 1961, 62 to be precise, when the building finally had to be raised, and Melo's Torino died there. But it had been so successful that I relocated. As soon as I found a site, I relocated in Georgetown, and we started again. And it took a long time, until 1967. By 1967, I had moved to DuPont Circle, and the restaurant, the entertainment part of the restaurant had disappeared because much had changed. But gastronomically, I was very determined that it would be a place where you would eat Italian, not Italian-American. And it worked. So in 1967, December 27th, I can never forget it, it's Pearl Arbor Day of 1967, the Washington Post food critic named Melo's place at DuPont Circle one of the top 10 restaurants in the city, and the only one that could be really be called an Italian restaurant and not an Italian-American restaurant. And that was the beginning of my life as a restaurateur in the restaurant business, and kind of changed my life.
I'm sure you're very proud of that, but you also then launched into other types of aspects of the restaurant business.
Of course, because in the quest for the final place, I changed 3 or 4 sites until I found one that I could do what I wanted to do. A supplier, an equipment supplier, jokingly said, "Listen, you've changed so many restaurants. You've taken and changed the aspect of restaurant. Why don't you do this as a profession?" I said, "Because the closest thing I can come to what you're saying is, as a set designer, I had to design sets for the stage, for plays." And he said, "But that's what the restaurant is. It's a setting for people to go and eat. Where the diners are the actors, they are the players, and the restaurant is the set." I said, "You're very right." So I became a restaurant designer, and I kept doing that for 30 years until I retired in 1994. I signed several nice restaurants in Washington. I was instrumental in establishing them or consulting with them.
Melo, we could probably spend an hour on your contributions to the Italian culture in Washington, D.C. in your long, illustrious history. But do you want to talk about some of the cultural contributions that you've made to the area? I understand that there was some risk that the church was going to be knocked down for 95.
There was a definite change in the Italian community in Washington. That was when defined by the retirement of Father De Carlo and the new ministry taking over the Holy Rosary Church, which, by the way, came to a point that almost to be extinct. The Holy Rosary, by the planners of the Highway Department of Washington, D.C., had been erased to make space for the superhighway that would connect Maryland to Virginia, 295. This would have meant that there'd been no more Holy Rosary. I remember Father Spigolon was then pastor of the church, and I was doing a Saturday and Sunday radio program. Pino was doing another one and also a television program. And we started a campaign, calling everybody we knew, everybody we'd met in the years being around. And finally, I must say that it worked, because one day we got one letter, one call from Father Giuseppe Spigolon, and I was with my brother. Says, "Hey, Pino, Melo, what is it, Father?" We made it. Made what? They have changed the plans. They're not going to run the highway where the church stands. The church is going to stay there. They're going to take a little piece. We're going to lose what used to be the dance hall and a little theater for the church, but the church is going to stay there. So that was probably the most significant contribution that the Cicala brothers had to the community, having played a small role in keeping the church standing where it stands today.
Now, you've been associated with a radio program for almost
1953.
1953. Do you want to talk about how that began and the impact it's had on the community?
Well, in 1953, there was no Italian program in Washington, and Italians really did not know what was going on in the neighborhoods or outside of the neighborhoods. So in 1953, they were playing a movie, Three Coins in the Fountain, at the Capitol Theater, and this gentleman that was doing documentaries in Washington, and I had become friends because being associated in the movie business, we went to see the movie, Three Coins in the Fountain. After the movie, we stopped by across the street, on F Street, there was a place called the Mayflower Donut Shop for coffee, and lo and behold, we talk Italian, then somebody comes there, "Hey, are you Italiano?" Yes, I'm Italiano from Utica, New Jersey. But how come no Italian programs in the city, not radio? In Utica, radio. I said, well, I don't know. He said, there is a radio station on the 10th floor here. I know the manager. Well, in fact, as a matter of fact, he's sitting in the booth down there. So I said, bring him over. So we talked to him. His name was Bill Cherry, Italian. And he said, you know what? Let me talk to Mr. Dillard, the owner of the station. The following day, he called up and says, oh, Mr. Dillard has agreed to let you have 1 hour on Saturday, not Sunday, Saturday morning at noon, 11 to, and do an Italian program. So the Italian program started, radio program. The first time we went on the air, I think we had probably five listeners, my mother, my father, because Pino wasn't here yet. Pino came later. So then from that Saturday, the station was an FM station. They bought what is now WMDO in Wheaton. They put an AM signal. That FM nobody was listening to. The AM, everybody was listening to AM radios because car radios were only AM. So the radio was not that big. Radio became important and big after the FCC issued FM licenses. So before you know, we are in the business. Then in 1955, 56, I get drafted. Pino had to take my place because there was nobody better to take my place. And after I come back from the service, Pino had done such a great job. I said, "You continue doing this, and I do something else." Because I've always liked to try things new, and for the simple reason that there was so much missing, and not so many people willing to take a chance to do something new, that I was reckless. When you're young, you only see, you work on impulse. They don't understand, let's do it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, still young, we'll try something else, But I was lucky. I'm happy to be able to say that I've been a catalyst to have encouraged lots of Italiani to venture into things that they didn't have the confidence to venture into, and I gave them the little push that they needed, the little extra push, and sometimes even going in with them to show that how much I believed in that particular project. And we're here today.
Melo, you mentioned your brother Pino, and when I came to this community, I would hear your name and his name often said together. He's passed away about 3 years ago. Do you want to describe a little bit for posterity your brother's contribution to the community?
Well, now it can be said. Pino would never say that, and he would not let me say it if he were alive. But to do a weekly radio program, at times with the addition of television program, does not take those 2 or 3 hours that you are on the air behind the microphone. It takes a lot of preparation, a lot of time, a lot of devotion. Pino could have been a millionaire. He had a degree in architecture. He could have been an architect. But I guess my asking him to take my place in 1956 was not 54, 5, and 6. It was not. If I wouldn't have done it, this would have happened. It would change his life, and he devoted so much time to the community because the radio was everything for the community. Pino, my daughter has a sore throat. What is the doctor that? Where should I take my daughter? Pino took the place of that Father De Carlo. It was the almanac for the city. We need a document. We need this. We need that. And Pino had to do it. On top of that, he had to go and make people happy that were supporting the program. Not to say about the telephone calls that you get. One day, one person on one side of the phone would say, "Hey, why did you play Neapolitan songs that day? Why do you only play Sicilian?" Then the next day, "Hey, why do you play only Neapolitan songs and not play? Hey, how come I never hear Canti degli Alpini?" Or he could never make everybody happy. So, and Pino tried, but that was an impossible task. But he tried very hard. And but I find that, thank God, the Italian programs were discovered by the Americans that served in Italy during the war and after the war. I dare say that the reason of this great resurgence of Italy after the war was not due to what the Italians, pre-war Italians that immigrated here had described Italy as, because they were here driven by need to live. They were poor people. They were not educated. So the description of Italy was a description not of Italy as Italy was, but as of the small town from where they came from, where maybe there was no electricity in the house, no indoor plumbing. So when war came and Americans came to Rome and they saw the Colosseum, they went to Pisa and they saw the Leaning Tower and they saw Florence, and they said, well, this is nothing like the Italians that our next door neighbor had been describing to us. So the Italians started going, the Americans started going back to Italy in peacetime, and Italy became what it is today. I think partly thanks because of the aftermath of the war. But anyway, this parenthesis, miei connazionali, some of them don't like me to say that, but it is the truth. Until 1943-44, southern Italy, the literacy rate was so high that they all happened in 1860 with the so-called unity of Italy, when Italy was unified, and Italy, the north was educated and the south was not. So there was some transition there that the southern Italians have always suffered from, including this reputation with the American people. When you think that in New Orleans, boat full of Italians came after the unification of Italy, and brothers ended up, some in the northern with the northern armies and some with the southern armies, and they were fighting each other. It's mind. What's the word?
Boggling.
Boggling. It's not, but it happened. It's history. But be that as may, today's Washington is what it is. It's a great cosmopolitan city. To me, maybe, I don't want to say the best, but one of the 5 best cities in the United States. Because if you're from San Francisco, we say, no, San Francisco is. If you're from Boston, you say from Boston. I would add a city in Canada, Montreal. But this is you like what you like.
Melo, since we're on camera, this is for posterity, unofficially, of course, but the Marconi Project would like to thank you and your brother Pino for the service to the Italian and Italian-American community for really the last 55, 60 years.
Well, I thank you. I thank you for in my brother's name because, yes, I did a lot of work in the background, but the person that carried the load was really Pino, and he deserved all the honors that were bestowed upon him and all the recognition that he got.
Melo, this community has been around for over 100 years, and you've been a contributor and a significant part for over 60 years. Can you look ahead and imagine what the influence, the Italian influence in a city like Washington can be for the next 60 years, the next 100 years?
Well, starting from the fact that when I came 60 years ago, you go to a supermarket, on the shelves you would see Muller's macaroni and Chef Boyardee's spaghetti and meatballs in the can. And today you see De Cecco, Garofalo, the best pastas, the best homemade fresh pasta like Rana's. The fact that in the department stores now you see Armani, Gucci, that Fiat has bought out Chrysler, that in the space race, the Italians contribute, manufacture instruments that go in the shuttle vehicles. Italians have earned and conquered their place in America, and I think that's manifest destiny that the Italians will continue to doing that, because one thing is for sure, the Italian way of life is probably the most envied way of life in the world, and that has become to come to the States, and everybody that can tries to embrace it. Design, fashions, eating, the way of eating. When you think that something as simple as pizza has made so many Americans wealthy, Domino's, Papa John, Two Caesars, unheard of, and now they are staples in the American's life. Espresso. I was, in one of my enterprises, 1968, I imported the very first espresso machine in the city. I had it, I used it in my restaurant. Then in 1971, I thought that I could import them on a grand scale, and I made a deal with an Italian manufacturer, and they sent me machines. There was no way to sell them until now. Starbucks, every other door there is a Starbucks. All Americans drink espresso. 30 years ago, espresso was considered black coffee. You know, what can I tell you? The Italians are here. The Italian way of life, I won't say Italians. The Italian way of life is here to stay and will play a great role. After all, Jefferson was he was the first exporter of Italian culture. Americans started drinking wine in the last 30 years, but Jefferson brought the vineyards. He had a Monticello, he had the vineyards. Zonin came to Northern Virginia, and now his wines are priced wines. They cost more money than imported wines from Italy. Americans drink wines. 40 years ago, Americans in the restaurant, they drank Coca-Cola. Now they drink mineral water from Italy, San Pellegrino, and Italian wines. And Californian wines, when they can afford it, because Californian wines are so good that some are more expensive than imported wines.